little bit since he launched the book at the Bangkok age, but now he's here with us to share about this new book. He's quite famous in Bangkok, so I don't need to tell too much about him. I think most of you know his previous book, Very Thai, which has become kind of a bestseller. And this one is after 10 years and more, right? It's become more really zooming in Bangkok. A few words about myself and Junction. I am Leah Shortina and I am the founder of Junction. And Junction is this place that you see here, is Southeast Asia Junction. So we focus on Southeast Asia, all the various aspects of Southeast Asia for events we do here as well as another location here in ACC as well as outside, but always related to Southeast Asia. And normally it's a reading room, so you can come and read about Southeast Asia whenever you like. With this, please, Philip.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Leah, for offering me this space to give a talk. It's one of those wonderful venues in Bangkok that we're very grateful to have, covering all kinds of detailed things about this region. And talking about detailed things about this region, this book goes into an awful lot of detail, and I'm just going to scratch the surface. But first of all, can you all hear me at the back? Is it clear? Thank you very much. Now, this book is called Very Bangkok in the City of the Senses, and my first impression about Bangkok was a very sensory one, as I think most people would say when they come here. There's so many ways this city assaults you, visually, orally, in so many different kinds of sensations, and this is more dramatic than you find in most cities in the world. It's not a bland place. So when I was thinking about ways to encapsulate what is special about this city, I went for that very kind of visceral sensory approach, because I think it merits it. Now, this is a city with many preconceived reputations and promotions and fixed ideas about it. It's marketed to the world as the land of smiles and in a very upbeat kind of way. Also recent slogans about the city, call it the City of Life, which I find very hard to disagree with. But it also has rigid reputations or notoriety. At the top here, this book, Navigating the Bangkok Noir, it's a window on a world that we know from all of those airport novels about how seedy Bangkok's underbelly is, and all the stories that undercover agents find in the bars of Nana and Patpong. And lately, there's been quite a lot of independent young designers and creatives making their own slogans about this place. And this cheeky one called I Want a Bangkok has ended up having a huge corner bigger than this room in Museum Siam. So it's a city with a lot of preconceived ideas that people come to the place, and very often the city doesn't match those expectations. Now, I came here in 1994, 26 years ago, and I was hired to set up the first City Listings magazine. And actually, that makes me partly responsible for another way of preconceiving this city, and that is to look at it through all the kinds of categories that city magazines have, all the kinds of lists of places to go, the genres of entertainments, and so forth. I also have a background in guidebooks, where the cities are divided up by area, by top sites, and so forth, all these other kinds of categories. So there's been a lot of categorizing that I've personally done at Bangkok, and all of these become barriers to seeing this city as something different than the generic cities around the world. Now, as Leah mentioned, 15 years ago now, I wrote a book called Very Thai, which probed the popular culture, the everyday things that we see in the street and in the public domain that are not classified as high culture, but they're the things we engage with day to day. And that caused a bit of a stir because it showed the culture in a different kind of way. It's a very engaged way, and it's the way, looking at it from how people come across it every day in the street. this particular book, very Bangkok, has some things in common with very Thai. It's the same size and similar format, but it's more like a distant cousin. Excuse me a second. Sorry about that, it's thirsty work talking. I decided to look at the city through yet another one of these filters, and that was the filter of the senses. Now, we all have many senses. A few of us have one or two fewer, but basically the way we experience this city is coming at us from all angles, and quite a lot of artists and designers are starting to show Bangkok in this kind of kaleidoscopic way of many things all happening at once. But there are various cultural things that are happening within what we're seeing, reasons why it looks the way it does. It might seem chaotic, but actually there's a lot of order in that chaos. In this venue, there's been a lot of talks about the informal culture of the street vendors and so forth. Well, they're very highly organized, but the formal culture of the country also is a source of a lot of chaos. So I look at these kind of contradictions and try to fathom out the cultural roots of where some of these different kinds of things are. This was actually shown in BACC. It's a shadow puppet of the Tree of Life with all kinds of things on it. So this book is a bit like that, but I'm trying to organize it with some kind of rationale. Now, one of the things we see a lot around the city are these mosaic mirror tiles. And it comes from a Buddhist idea of glinting light disseminating the Dharma. But there's a very interesting outlook from a famous monk who was born 6 years after Bangkok was founded, Long Po To. And he's best known as the man who exorcised Mena Pakanom, the famous ghost, by putting her soul in a jar and floating her down Kong Pakanom. But he also came up with this idea of the six-sided mirror. And we tend in life to look at the mirror and see our face back. And we do prioritize face, particularly in this culture. Face is extremely important. But he conceived that we should consider a six-sided mirror, that all around us are ways of reflecting on our life and reflecting on what's happening. And he associated each of these facets with a sense. Now, usually Buddhism views the senses as something to overcome. They're some kind of distraction that's not allowing us to see the world. But he had this way of seeing that senses are a path to getting insights into the world around us. And we know this neurally. There's all kinds of ways that our senses are dominating us. This thing's called the homunculus, and apparently it presents our senses in the order in which we receive them. Now, perhaps the most dominant sense that we come across in Bangkok is smell. I remember my cousin, when I asked him what he thought of Bangkok, he said, the whole street, every street smells of food. I mean, even after the vendors have gone, years later, the streets still smell of that food. A lot of Bangkok smells like this on the right, with the woman on the canal boat putting a menthol inhaler into her one nostril. And quite a lot of Bangkok smells like the other side. There's a lot of culture in this city that we can understand through the power of scent. And in fact, those garlands are just another way to disseminate the Dharma in terms of Buddhist belief. Now, scent is also part of the whole world of food. Now, a lot of books about Bangkok will have lists of go-to restaurants for food tourism, whether it's street food or Michelin restaurants. But faced with taste as a category rather than food, it led me to be thinking about what is special about Bangkok taste, or as a chef would put it, what is the flavor profile of Bangkok, and how is it maybe different from the flavor profile of Thai food in general? Now, one of the things I found in researching this book is as soon as I talk about Bangkok, everybody drifts the conversation towards Thainess, especially Thais will do this. But Bangkok is not the same as the general view about Thailand or the principles of Thainess. It's very specific. And the flavor profile of Bangkok is, for example, very influenced by the Teochew area of Chinese cuisine. Particularly if you've eaten seafood here, you can tell that immediately. A lot of the street food comes from that area. And you can also look at it that the royal court food, that's also Bangkok food. It's a very particular Bangkok way of preparing the food. So I look at this through the world of street food and also even the world of drinks. Now, for those that like meat in their drinks, this cocktail is a lab mu cocktail. It tastes exactly like a warm lab mu salad. And as you sip from the side of the glass, you can inhale that bacon and have a taste sensation. It's not for everyone, but it really is very interesting, and it's available at Eat Me if anyone wants to try it. Now, among the other primary senses that we will tend to think of, touch is another one. It tends to get played down in the West, where people are not so tactile as they are in Thailand. And we're very familiar with the Thai predilection for massage. It's something that we associate with the city. But another factor is this is a world metropolis where an awful lot of things are still handmade. Wherever you go in the cities, you find handmade things, particularly in the street. And under bridges, around where the motorcycle taxi boys are seated, you'll find handmade furniture. You'll often find in areas like this, people hand-making crafted products on the street. And these are all something special about this place. Now, noise pollution is one way of describing sound. We're all got fairly used to how loud this city is. Here we can see people measuring the decibels, which are higher than most cities around the world. And on the left, this is an installation, which was also at the ACC, showing different sound environments and how Bangkok is particular in that way. Around the city we find music and noise generated in all kinds of ways, particularly like these tuk-tuks that have got ranks of speakers in them. But this condo developer even looked deeper into this and decided to take the design of its towers, its condominium towers, and translate it into a computer-readable musical notation, and then get somebody to arrange the sound so you could actually listen to the sound of your noble apartment as you feel so noble in it. There's a lot of other kinds of cultural sounds going on under the surface in Bangkok. If you pay attention, a lot of the buskers in Bangkok are playing very interesting handmade instruments. Often they're made from things like coconut shell and carved wood. This schoolboy, just down the road from here, he was playing what looks like a guitar that's made out of a plough. And on the right here, we've got another sound that I think is the sound of the universe being born, which is blowing a conch shell. But anyone who's going to a blessing of a building in Bangkok will hear this quite unusual instrument that you don't tend to hear in most places in the world. Now, the dominant sense, by far, is sight. Particularly in the West, we're a very sight-biased culture. And I was talking about looking in a mirror. Well, the mobile phone selfie is a kind of mirror, and it's quite interesting to play a bit with some of these senses. Rather than talking about sight, I thought about, well, what about looking? That's a bit more deliberate. So what are the ways of looking in this culture? So I go in a lot into what is the Thai gaze. We hear a lot about the white male gaze or the colonial gaze. But what about the Thai gaze? What's going on there? And one of the things that I've drawn on in making this book is a lot of insights from big data. Because there's so much information nowadays, we can see patterns, and people have done an analysis of Thai selfies, particularly Bangkok selfies, and they found that there are things that are an outlier in Thailand, that it's different from other places in the world. One is in the filters. Thais don't go for black and white filters. They steer away from monochrome filters, preferring very bright, vivid colours in their Instagram selfies. Also, the whites of Thai eyes are bigger than other selfie markets. Also, Thais tend to, Bangkok people, this is a sample of Bangkok, tend to tilt their head at a certain angle, and they tend to look slightly up. So overall, this is read by psychologists as a very passive pose, that generally en masse, the people of this city are taking photographs of themselves in a passive way. And this is something from the culture that we can have a think about. Now, in trying to analyse this place, I recognise that I'm looking with one of those white male gazes, and I'm trying all the time to think, what is the local perspective, or perspectives, because there are many. And I recognise that in my time in Thailand, a lot of the aspiration of Bangkok has shifted from trying to be like the West to trying to be like modern Asia, or as one Korean researcher put it, like white Asians. And we see a new kind of look happening, people aspiring to look like general East Asian people. The Korean look is a major influence on plastic surgery in this city. So people are actually getting themselves adjusted to look like adjusted Korean people. So something is physically going on that's changing the shape of this city. I'm also trying in the pictures in the book, which there's 450, trying to present some fresh perspectives. I mean, it's a bit hard. This is a very heavily photographed city. But looking at the tuk-tuk, frankly, most of the time they're stationary, and most of what their drivers are doing is waiting. So I figured this was a way to show the life of the tuk-tuk driver. Now, when it comes to sight, we've actually got two senses. All in all, our bodies have got depends how you count them, but around about 22, 23, 24 senses. And we don't tend to think of them as strongly as those main six, but the other sight one, as well as form, is colour. We have a totally separate colour sense. This is quite an interesting project that a Thai designer did many years ago, in fact. She went around the old town and she worked out the colour swatches, the Pantone colours of various different streets in the old town, according to things that were sold there, the way they'd been painted, various other things that were the strong, overwhelming look of the city. Although recently the old town's been painted to look exactly the same shade. More recently, a Thai artist, Pyro Tiamati, has created a thing called Thai Tone, which is a series of paints that are based on the indicative colours of this place, taken from all kinds of traditional objects and things from popular taste. So you can even paint your pipes according to traditional Thai culture. of the overriding impacts of this city that we all feel is our thermoception, which is our sense of temperature. This is a very hot place, and we can also sense it's an extremely damp place. And this affects us day to day. I did used to wonder why there'd be a strange line of people crossing a pavement and think, why are they standing like that? And then I realized that there was a power pole and they were waiting for a bus or waiting for something, and they were all under that tiny thin strip of shade. And you can see that the same thing happening here. The taxis are waiting not in line with the traffic lights, but in line with the overhead railway because it's the middle of the day. Now, the heat island effect of this city and also its inverted thermal weather systems are creating all kinds of pollution problems for us. And as you might have seen, the BMA's been going around spraying water up into the sky so that we can all be saved from PM 2.5. And I noticed actually on my way here in the taxi at Henri Dunant Road, they've got all this spray coming out of the footbridges, making the biggest difference to the experience for everyone. Now, for the urbanists in the room, they very much use the idea of space as a way to look at cities. And there's a big chapter in the book about how Bangkok's shaped and its format. Its historical form has mostly been shop houses in most of its history, which are imported Chinese form from South China and used a lot in Southeast Asia, with a lot of narrow roads going around, and people living above the space where they're working, creating a very particular Bangkok form of space. Now we can also see how this looks from above. There's all kinds of very particular ways that Bangkok's patterned. And looking down on part of it, this is Bangkok. You can't even see the paths between the houses. But this is also true of countless old communities around Bangkok. In fact, it was so tight here, they had no space to make a football pitch, so they made an L-shaped football pitch. I'm dying to find out what the rules are, but it looks like it can also be used for something like basketball or any other game you please, but it could be interesting. And I think it could be applied. I mean, why not L-shaped snooker tables? Maybe someone should try this. On this side, we've got an idea about how the city is becoming two-tier. This is actually under Rama 8 Bridge, but you've got a sense of how there's space under bridges and under skywalks and space above. Now, in some places, this is affecting how architects design buildings, that they're designing them differently below the station height of mass transit, and then above the station height they become all elaborate in another kind of way, in a fanciful design. And in my neighborhood I've seen 2 or 3 buildings doing this. So even the two-tier level of the street is affecting how buildings are being built in this city, as well as who is walking along the ground level and who's walking along the upper level. You'll find people are dressed differently, they behave differently, all kinds of different activities going on. And on the right, this is one of those towers where the city's going vertical. The very horizontal city is changing into a very vertical city. And this is changing how communities are organized. The city used to be arranged just according to random acts of development. That people had land, they built something. If it was down the alleyway and you couldn't drive a car down, never mind. But now things are starting to get built along transit lines. So the mass transits are creating nodes, and it's taking on more of a typical international city kind of structure. But we still have very Bangkok kinds of demarcating space. This kind of thing we see all over the city. I'm not sure quite what this is demarcating, because there's plenty of broken pavement that's outside where this is marked. But this kind of thing is the typical parking barrier that you see all over the city, where people use found objects. It could be a traffic cone with a stick coming out of it, or a bungee cord between something and a tree. Here you've got like the broken chairs, old biscuit tins, water bottles. This is very typical use of space in Bangkok. Now, to get around this kind of environment, you do need a sense that people in this city are very good at, which we tend to forget about in the West, and that is a sense of balance. We all use it all the time, we don't really think about it, but it's quite an integral part of how Thai people are brought up, with the concept of Marriott, of the politeness in posture that you see, that's in every kind of gesture, how people are walking gently, how people give things, how people move through space. This is particularly apparent in Thai dance, where there's all kinds of feats of balance that are the pinnacle, in the martial arts, and in sports that are popular here. They're all activities very strongly to do with balance. And if you go through a market, people don't tend to collide with things. Well, local people don't. White people do. We're known as yakshas, or ogres, because of the plot-hopping way we collide with things and move through space. So local people are seeing outsiders as having a less balanced way of moving, and it's something that we have to become aware of in the city. Now, although the city is very jammed up, movement is another sense that is very apparent here. The way that when the traffic jams, people will surge across the roads. Jaywalking is an institution here. And things are constantly on the move. You think of whole restaurants get packed up into a cart and then moved off to another location. All kinds of things with motion through the street that maybe have a more fixed place in other cities. But there are plenty of obstacles. This is what happens when you walk. Now, somebody thought it would be a good idea to spray paint the paving slabs as the game of battleships. Now, where you see the mines, those are those slabs that tilt when you step on them and send black mud up the back of your leg. And I tested that they do. So this one was actually at Lab Prao, but he found all sorts of places like Asok and Pebbury Road where this was true. So we all take our pale trousers at high risk when walking along Bangkok streets. Now, Bangkok streets do make a special concession for the disabled. Having gone around the city with someone in a wheelchair who took great pride of travelling the world in a wheelchair, and the first place he admitted defeat was Bangkok. But now there's special accommodation made for people in wheelchairs, as we can see here, where if you're in a wheelchair, you've got the opportunity to slalom. Now, what other city offers this? You may come out of that with no skin left on your knuckles, but at least you'll have made an accomplishment. Now, this is supposedly to stop vendors, but as you can see, it didn't make any difference in the world. But it shows the disabled are thought of here. Now, when we're moving around in the spaces of Bangkok, it helps to have some direction. And this was an extraordinary street plan that was done up at Jaran Sanitwong during the creation of the SkyTrain. Obviously, the drivers knew precisely which way to go. Now, this city's pretty wild in the way there's everything moving around all over the place, not much orderliness. There's a lot of tension between chaos and order in this city. So there's a lot of attention paid to making us all walk in a particular way. A lot of effort goes into telling people how they should do things. And so on the SkyTrain, a city where people would crowd around a bus stop and initially on the SkyTrain would crowd around the entrances. Now, it's a point of honor to stand in straight lines going all the way to the other end of the platform. One peculiarity in Bangkok, people drive on the left and trains go on the left. But people are told to walk along the right, on bridges and stairways, and also if you look at the river and the canals, boats go along the right. So I haven't been able to get to the bottom of this one. I'm sorry, I can't tell you what's going on. Now, it used to be quite a challenge for people who didn't read Thai to get on a bus. And even if you did read Thai, you had the number, but you didn't have any indication of where that number was going. So you had to just be a regular user of that bus to know what the bus route was. And there was a schoolboy who, a few years ago, shamed the BMA by producing a brilliant colour-coded themed map that reorganised the bus central area of Victory Monument. And so the BMA came up with this ingenious plan here, listing in extremely small print all of the buses starting at your ankles and going to about a foot above your head. It didn't really tell you where to go, but it did have very nice lotus bud finials on the poles, which we can all appreciate. Now, every year we've got a design week, and people might think it's maybe a bit airy-fairy, you know, that it's all this fantasy, that how could that possibly reform the way this city's organised? Well, last year, a group called, I think it was Sataranawa who did this, they created bus stops with route numbers, all kinds of positions of where the bus stops would be at each junction, and on the front and the back there's different kinds of information. And within a few weeks it was being trialled by the BMA, and now they're all over the centre of the city. So it goes to show that if somebody has an idea about how to organise things, it can take off here. It is possible. So the city may be entering a new phase of logical order. But one of the things that's quite nice about Bangkok is that directions tend to be more by personal landmarks, directions according to things that are familiar. And quite a lot of the signage in this city is very friendly. I mean, look at this friendly policeman. He only gives one direction, but the least we can be, it's a smiling face, and it's the model, I think Ken Wong Hua Han, right? He was the model for this guy. The cycle paths are designated with hearts, so we know to do cycling as something that's happy for the city. And something that's an interesting phenomenon, I've seen it at least 3 times now, where festivals that are set within small areas of small sois that are very hard to access and very hard to give clear directions, what they've tended to do is mark the route using animals or friendly signage. So here it's art in soy, and they're using illuminated cats. Another festival used little bird lamps, and you can follow these around the pathways. And there was another festival which also used cats. So this is perhaps a particularly Bangkok way to direct people so that you know where you're going. Now, this is a culture that actually has a whole philosophy of direction. It comes from the Tripumparuam, the old cosmology of Bangkok, based on the Mount Meru principle, where there was 8 compass point directions and a 9th going up. And you can see that Watarun is a perfect model of that cosmology, all embodied. So there is a sense of another direction mattering an awful lot in this culture, of things that are higher than other things. And this affects city planning, like around the Old Town. Things are not allowed to look down on the old royal city. But it also affects how people position things in interpersonal situations, or even in graphic design on a page. And there are a lot of other belief systems in this city, many other cultures with their own senses of direction. There's a very big Islamic population in Bangkok. Their mosques are facing Mecca. An enormous Chinese population. A lot of things that they are building and creating are done according to feng shui. And one of the ways that people have talked about of Chinatown is that the road of Yarra is shaped like a feng shui dragon. Well, what's quite interesting is that changed over time. The original feng shui dragon was going in a totally different direction. It started at the river and went uphill, as it should do, and its belly was where the old market was in Chinatown, and its tail went up past the Dragon's Tail Temple. Now, when the Chinese population was, if you like, converted into being a Thai Chinese population and made to submit to Thai ways of doing things, the feng shui was actually changed from the dragon being at one of the canals, then going up Yararat towards the symbolic heights of the old town. And the belly of the dragon had to move, so it moved to the new market. And this gate was put at the eye of the dragon. So there's another layer to that in that this gate is not a conventional gate. It's on a roundabout. It doesn't go anywhere. But it's actually a monument to King Rama IX's Golden Jubilee. So there's quite a strong effort made in adjusting symbolic things about the Chinese culture to become Thai Chinese. And one of the famous directional landmarks is the city pillar, where things used to be measured from. But actually, other organizations use the old central post office as kilometer zero. And then still further organizations use Victory Monument as kilometer zero. So you've got three centers of the city to choose from. And when you go to the city pillar, there's two city pillars. So you've always got a choice. One of those other senses that we are aware of as I get older, I'm aware that time passes quicker, and it turns out that actually in our minds, as we age, our sense of time gets less precise. But we always know when it's 8 o'clock and 6 o'clock, because the anthem will be played and the flag will go up and come down. And we've also got a sense of time draining away as we're waiting at the traffic lights for those countdown numbers, which I think Bangkok was the first place that had them. I think they've moved to some other cities around the world now, but it was a local invention. And I also this is where I look at timelines in the city. I've tried to present my own personal view of the landmarks in the thresholds of change in this city in the book. And here we can see how the riverscape has changed from one of the very earliest photographs of the city to one from a condominium on the river. And there's another way of looking at time, and that is in terms of reincarnation. There's an interesting place to consider that in Bangkok, a place called Death Cafe, where you can actually lie in a coffin and an assistant will actually slide the coffin door shut, and you have to knock on the coffin to let yourself out. And after that you can go and have one of the death-themed coffees and soft drinks available. So the idea is that you come to recognize the fragility of life and make the best use of it when you come out of that cafe. Now, I've used the word suffering here, but I'm referring to the sense of pain, which we all have. It's one of our strongest senses. And a lot of things in Bangkok are designed to ease that sense of pain, or even to make money from it. Here we've got a display for one of Bangkok's medical tourism hospitals, which is reaching out to its target market. Now, one of the senses that we do think of in the West, which is definitely one that Luang Por To had thought of, which is the sixth sense. And this is very visible in Bangkok. We see it everywhere. We see dresses hanging in trees of haunted places where the tree nymphs are. We see people rubbing powder into logs in order to deduce the lottery numbers. And this up here is the snake shrine down in Bangkokian. It's an interesting place if ever you go there. The offerings they give are trays of eggs with rubber snakes draped across the top. And what happened was that the Ramatu Road disrupted a naga that was pregnant, and people died at the scene, so they decided to put this shrine there, and so there's been no deaths there since. Now, it could be said that we surrender our senses to another being if we go into trance. We're not in control of those senses suddenly. And there is a very big subculture of trance in Bangkok. We don't see it on the surface very much, and it's not something that the authorities promote particularly, but you do see it happening at the Hindu temple in Silom Road at the Navaratri festival. And this is all, which is I think this is one of those festivals. This is this is the vegetarian festival in Chinatown, and this is a woman who's being a medium, channeling one hymn, and she's got a skewer going through her cheek and tongue. Meanwhile, this is a man who's been possessed by the tattoos on his body, and he is being, I'm not sure whether calmed or set off like this by his tattooist, who's placing a mask over his head in a ritual. Now, there's another sense that people associate with Bangkok, and that is sensuality, or libido. And there's a lot of very lurid ways of looking at this. But it was quite interesting when Museum Siam did an exhibition about gender, and they looked at all kinds of aspects of gender in quite an open way. And they had an interactive section at the end of the exhibition where you could try on the different types of padding that trans people use, and it was an eye-opener to have that on your own body. And they also presented people with a generic human shape on which to draw your gender identity. And there were some very interesting results. Some people seem to be happier with their gender identity than others, but we can tell that there's a lot of diversity going on. And then, of course, there is a sense of fun. I don't know if this technically counts as a sense, but in Bangkok we can allow that. The sense of sanuk is something that we all enables us to survive in this city in every interaction. And on the right here we can see that you can even test your strength in the factory of happiness. The harder you hit this, the more happy you can be. Now, with all this sensory stimulation, there's actually quite a few places you can go to be completely unstimulated by anything sensual at all, like 7-Eleven or shopping malls, which I personally think one of the appeals of them is that they are not a sensory bombardment most of the time. They're cool, they're very bland, they're neutral, they're a relief. Before we go back out into all of this sensory stimulation, And on the right, well, some places have sensory stimulation. This is in Emporium, where even the shopping baskets are painted gold. Now, in those shopping malls, we start to find another level of sensors, digital sensors, and those little beeping gates. They are all contributing to something that our bodies pick up, but we don't notice on a conscious level, and that is the sheer amount of electromagnetic pollution in this city. I've been told it's the pollution that we know least about, which affects us on quite a high level. And Bangkok has a very particular electromagnetic signal that you can hear. There's a kind of headphones you can put on that can pick up this signal and translate it into sound. And it's extraordinary walking around the streets of Bangkok, finding out where the electromagnetic pollution is coming from. It's really very shocking. The most polluted place I found was the Sephora shop in Siam Center. So if you're buying any makeup, go in a lead suit or something, because it's extremely polluting. Now, there's a little detail here that I absolutely love, which is that the digital ministry has redesigned its angelic guardian figure to incorporate a Wi-Fi signal. Now, I've taken a bit of a liberty with the book to explore further the idea of digital sensing, because I think it tells us a lot about how the city's transforming. From satellites, we can see the land use. You can go to a website and see live data of what they call the population mountains all over the globe. And you can see them from lots of different angles. And you can tell that certain cities like in Korat are very, very dense in a small area. But Bangkok's more like a full-scale Tibetan mountain range, where it's pretty dense pretty much everywhere. This map did the rounds recently. This is marked in red all the areas that at high tide will be underwater in 30 years' time. There's an extraordinary thing called depth map, which urbanists are starting to use for city planning, and it shows us a way of looking at the city. On the left here, all of those red and yellow marks, they are the kinds of things that appear on maps, actual proper maps like Google Maps and paper maps. But on the left is all of these areas that are very hard to access through little lanes. And you can program all sorts of different criteria into this, and it starts to show up some interesting things. The sort of things that doesn't appear on maps, but which people go to all the time, because they're not buildings. These are things like the stalls that are bak soy, or little neighborhood areas that people congregate and they buy things, they socialize there, and they're very important in daily life. And they do show up on depth map, but they are not found on any other kind of map. This is an interesting Instagram map showing where people from abroad, in the warm coloured tones, where they're taking their Instagrams, and where Bangkok people are taking their Instagrams. It's a different kind of, they're in the blue colours. So you can see even places like Gazetsa University are even picked out in colour there. You can see a totally different shape because there's so many selfies and other images being taken there. But ultimately, this is also a city of people. And I rather like this little art installation where there are certain areas of the city marked out, and people can come up and take a different colour strand and mark their particular routes, like maybe where they work, where their family lives, and maybe where they live, something like this. And it kind of gives a little bit of a hint about the way that this is a city made up of personal connections, a lot of communities, a lot of social networks that are something that you only start to uncover when you get deep inside the city. And in this book, the first half is about the senses, but in the next third of the book, I go into those networks and look at all kinds of social and cultural reasons why the city is the way it is. And the very last part of the book is reflections on the city about how it's portrayed, memory, tourism, all these kinds of ways that the city thinks about itself and that other people interpret it. So there's an awful lot of other ways of looking at the city that I haven't even told you, but I hope this is a useful overview so that you can go out there and start using these 24 senses that you have at your disposal as you walk around Bangkok's pavements. Thank you very much. So we'll take some questions, and I think you're aware that the book's on sale outside. I'm also happy to sign copies if you'd like that.
Okay, we still have some time. I stopped filling because I want to give an opportunity to engage in the discussion about your own experience of Bangkok and its experience as he described. So I open the floor. Comments, questions, welcome. I will take 3 first. One in the back. Anyone? 2? One more? Okay, let's go with these 2, please.
Yes, hi Philip.
Please, loud.
Yes, okay, thanks for the introduction. I really like the way you portray Bangkok from different senses, and you introduced the element of time, which I'm really interested in. And I wonder if you can share with us some of your observation of how Bangkok changed, because you've been here for more than 2 decades. Thank you.
Well, that question sort of relates to mine, maybe truly personal. I've been coming here for about a month each year for the past 15 years. And when I would go home to the United States, I would say the cliche about Thai people is that they're the friendliest people in the world. And I would say that it just may be true, because I always felt they made eye contact with me as I walked down the street and smiled at me. But for the past 2 years, I no longer find that to be the case. I don't know whether that's just me or whether anyone else can relate to that. But if you have any comment.
Okay, I'll just repeat the questions. The first one was about what changes I've noticed in Thailand, and the second question, similar to that, was very specific to Bangkok seeming a very friendly, smiley place in the past, but the last few years less so. I've seen at least 5 different phases in my 26 years here. I arrived during the Asian tiger boom, when everything was about being modern, and particularly with a Western spin on it. So there was a lot of new, very Western-style buildings going up. A lot of it was in a quite strange hybrid kind of way. You'd find buildings that had got classical and Gothic and all kinds of other architectural symbols all just clipped onto them. Lots of novelty buildings, like the elephant building still around, the robot building, but there was many other things like the Phoebus nightclub that was designed like a spaceship. There was malls with volcanoes on the roof that were erupted at certain times every day as part of a water park. So it was a period when lots of traditions were being thrown out and everything modern was being embraced. And then we had the crash in 1997 and a totally different feeling. That there was a lot of crisis, a lot of people were knocked off balance, and people couldn't finish buildings. There was a lot of landmarks that were left unfinished, and imports couldn't be afforded, so there was a lot of focus on local things that people could do. So there was a huge increase in markets and local fairs, in walking streets. You'd see the revival of herbal things, handmade things. I personally think that was my favorite time in Bangkok, although I know a lot of people struggle through it. But there was a lot of experimental art done at that time, a lot of unemployed architects were turning their design skills and thinking, what could I do with local materials? And they basically created the Thai design industry. And lots of things like this happened. And then after we got through that period, we into the new millennium, in the Thaksin period, he was very lucky because he was able to reap all of the commercial rewards of that period of experimentation. So that period, there were lots of fashion weeks and film festivals and lots of wonderful trade fairs where all of this kind of creativity started new industries. And in the media, there were suddenly lots of new stories to tell about Bangkok and Thailand. It used to be just the old cliches, but suddenly there were lots of new things to say about the city. And then we went into a period of fighting between red and yellow, and within families, within communities, and I think this is where the second questioner gets the answer. There's a lot of interpersonal difficulty among groups of people that didn't have that difficulty before. They're mixed socially. Something I discuss is about the impact of this on things like housing estates. Housing estates used to have all kinds of communal get-togethers for festival days. They'd light candles on Buddhist festivals. They'd get together for the royal birthdays. They'd have all kinds of festive events. And older people would be making huge vats of curry, and it would be like a very social thing. But after a period of this political division, it got tricky to be in social situations because you don't know what subjects might come up, and that family down the road might be red and you're yellow, and they might feel they didn't want to mix. And I think a lot of this stress, particularly after 2010, was especially strong. I think possibly the biggest single event in as a watershed, along with the crash in '97, was the mixture of massacre and arson going on in 2010. And it's rather sad in a way that at that period, I think a lot of Bangkok people don't show much civic pride about Bangkok. But there has been a view from many people in Bangkok of their city being under siege or under attack in 2010 and coming to realize that it's their home. But this, unfortunately, was viewed as very much a two-sided thing. Our city is being under attack by outsiders. So at the same time, a lot of people felt, I don't belong in this city anymore. This city doesn't feel like my place. And it's awkward that a lot of the city pride has been associated with a thing called big clean-up days. And it started with the clean-up after 2010. But something that's happened a lot since the coup, when there's been a dictatorship phase in 2014 onwards, was a sense of clearing away a lot of street markets, a lot of evictions of local communities. And what happens after that is the BMA get together with people to have a big clean-up day. They use the English words, big clean-up day. They send out press releases with people with masks on and brooms and scrubbing, literally soaping down the streets and cleaning the city of the people who used to live there. This is sometimes it's been called urban cleansing, but it's a little bit ethnic cleansing too, in a kind of soapy way, but not necessarily worse than that. But it's removing different types of people from the city centre. So the city is becoming sorted in a way of economic class becoming much more generic. And we don't know how this is going to continue. Sometimes street markets are coming back, but with entire city blocks being removed now, in the last sort of 5 years since the coup, you find entire areas of the city being wiped clean, instead of new buildings going in between old ones. it's quite absolute what's happening. So I don't know what the next stage is, but it's quite dramatic what's changing now.
Follow up is one. Well, I'd just like to comment, add something to what you just said. I think we also see the advent of the internet. You see people walking, riding in the BTS, all heads are bowed now, and all faces are masked very recently. It's a kind of how people are changing from the extroversion of the use of to introspection now. Who am I? Everything around me is changing very quickly. So I have to figure out where I am, what I'm doing, who I am, what I stand for, and that's appeared exclusion of other people in relationship to other people.
Thank you very much, Philip. I enjoyed very much the talk. And I thought maybe I'd just give a little perspective from someone who came here 50 years ago.
50?
Yeah.
Wow.
I came in 1965. And Bangkok and Bangkok now are two totally different cities. When I first arrived, Satwan Road had a canal down the middle. And there really was a Satwan Thai and a Satwan Yuan, which were used to when I started to work here in 1969, the thing, when you finished work, you all went out together. That disappeared about 30 years ago, basically because of traffic. And people were moving out further, so it was harder to get together because you had a long commute home. Buses. When I used to ride the buses, you could tell which route you were on because the bus companies had different colors. There were different bus companies. So if you saw a brown bus coming, that was number 77. If it was a blue bus, it was a different route. So it was easy to tell. And then they all got amalgamated, you couldn't tell the routes. And particularly if you had short-sighted, which I do, you couldn't read the number on the bus. But it was far easier to see the color. I remember when the Dusatani, which no longer exists, was the tallest building in Bangkok. I remember when the Siam Center was built. There was nothing there. Siam Square on land that Chula gave. I also remember when Queen Sirikit promoted Thai silk. So everybody who worked in the civil service, which included university professors, which I was at the time, had to wear mud meat. I haven't seen a silk shop this time when I've come, and where is mud meat silk gone? It's disappeared. So the changes are quite amazing. I have to say, I haven't noticed that Thais are less friendly. One of the things which really I found, I speak Thai, and that I think has made a huge difference. I still find when walking down the street, people look me in the eye and smile. I come from Canada, Toronto, and that doesn't happen in Toronto. You smile at someone and they're wondering, okay, where's that person? So I just wanted to add, changes from 50 years ago to now. And some of them I think have been good. The SkyTrain, I really love. The MRT. But others, there's a lot more pollution now. But I do have to say, flooding seems to be mitigated. I can remember the Siam Center when it was sinking, and you could see it because the difference between the sidewalk and the first step kept getting larger and larger until they finally just added another step. And so I've seen some good things happening as well as some positive. Sorry, I just wanted to add that.
Thank you very much for that. The first questioner was talking about the influence of the internet. And I think that's been a huge influence on how the city's changed. People are meeting via direct online communication, and that's had a huge effect on entertainment in the city. There are far fewer places to go out. There's less of a nightlife scene. And on an interpersonal level, it perhaps has turned on like things like online dating. It's turned the city almost towards like a matchmaker service, where there's not all the game going on in public in venues that there has historically been. And this is true all around the world. But I think it reduces interpersonal contact in yet another space. And as you said, people are not looking up from their phones. And I think this would have a huge effect on the Thai personality. You were saying Thais are getting more introspective. One of the things I feel about Bangkok is that I'm in a city that's extremely extrovert. And I notice there's a lot of controversy about a thing called SOTUS, which is this seniority indoctrination that goes on during initiation at universities and military and so on, other places. Now, it has its negative side, but one of the positive things about it is it's very much about galvanizing people to be social beings. And I think it also, it took its baton from the way festivals were always organized. Everyone was involved in the festival. You all took part in the processions, and you all took, dressed up, and the older people all inculcated the younger people in how to do things. And there was always a sense of everyone having a role and taking part and being quite gregarious, almost as a social necessity. And it is a bit less like that now. People are much more individualistic. There's, I think online, you also don't get this interpersonal politeness that is still a mark of this city, and people are very, even if they're less friendly than they used to be, they're still very polite interpersonally in their body language. But there's no body language going on online with all this flaming and extreme hatred and damnation of people. A lot of this is even in the structuring of Facebook pages. There's a lot of discussion about street vendors, but there's hate pages for street vendors, which say that people who defend street vendors should be hated too. It's quite striking. There are neo-Buddhist groups on the internet that talk about their own righteousness, but they are against what they're calling superstition, or the indigenous beliefs of the country, the sixth sense beliefs. There's one such page called Fuck Ghost. And it's spitting out an expletive to this whole section of the population, which is the majority population. And you wonder where this venom is coming from. It's really very hate-filled, and maybe it was always there. And perhaps the internet is becoming a way for people to drop their polite face and their polite body language and to reveal what they were thinking all along, perhaps.
Last round. 1, 2, 3.
We often hear people say there should be more parks. There should be more parks in Bangkok is one of the things you hear often. Not enough green space. The city is changing a lot, and BMA does do a lot of things to try to improve the city. What would you do, Phil, if you were the head of BMA and you could make some changes to the city?
Okay.
Hello, Philip. Actually, I have two questions. First is how Bangkok is different from, the rest of Thailand, and the second one is what is your most significant sense of Bangkok?
Okay. I've been working with Thai since 1986, and obviously the one thing I really about your book is it's a place that is endlessly fascinating. You never tire of Thailand or Bangkok. And so, and I think your book is absolutely spot on, because whenever I come working
the senses. And there is something refined and skillful in Thai culture. And I just wanted to finish on a positive note, because it's very easy to have a declensionist narrative after many years. We all do it everywhere. But I think the key thing you also pointed out is that there's something pan-Asian, it's more pan-Asian in its direction than it was in the 80s.
Thank you very much. I'll try and recap the question so I remember myself. The first one was, if I was at the BMA, what would I do? Second one, sorry, could you repeat that? Yes, the difference between Bangkokness and Thainess, and what was my favourite sense of, and then an observation about the sensory nature of the city. I would say that if I was, the BMA is making efforts, but sometimes those efforts are directed towards trying to make it like Singapore. I mean, I do discuss this in the last chapter of the book quite extensively, and BMA people are on record as saying they want it to be like Singapore. But it can't be like Singapore, but Singapore's a very easy to city-state to manage in such a small population. And Bangkok has this hinterland of quite different kinds of needs and population types to deal with. If I was running the BMA, I would recognize that this is a city of diversity and that everything it does to try and improve life should reflect and support a diversity. But I think, and this links to the second point, that there is extremely strong ideological thing at work here, a mindset that is ideological, and that is to do with the ideology of Thainess. Thainess is not a description of what is, it's an instruction about how things should be according to a certain set of people. And in order for it to be that pattern, that recipe for being Thai, you actually have to destroy what is there to start with. The indigenous culture, the variety the ethnic variety had to go in order to make ethnically pure Thais. I don't think that's ever been achieved. There were never any ethnically pure anybody. But the book also looks at this sheer variety of peoples. One chapter I look at is called Becoming Bangkokian, and it is about how people adjust themselves to this city, particularly migrants from upcountry and migrants from other parts of the world, and also sojourners. A lot of us expatriates like me are sojourners. We're here perhaps for part of our life. We're not necessarily migrants, more than an expat, but we're here for a period of time. And a lot of the Chinese used to be like this until they had to make a decision to settle or not to settle. And so there's a lot of ways in which Bangkok is more tolerant than the rest of the country as a whole. The state is very demarcating and very ideological, but Bangkok is very accepting, and a lot of people can live here the whole of their life and not be Thai. But you can become Bangkokian. All kinds of ethnicities. It could be said that the Indian Thais, they are nationals. They do have Thai nationality, but socially they have a slightly semi-detached way of being. They connect a lot more to the Indian subcontinent in the way they're educated, and their travels, and their business, and they also socialize quite a lot within themselves, but also with expatriate circles in a way that, say, the Thai Chinese don't. So there's ways of being in Bangkok. You can choose your circles, and it partly comes from the way the city was set up, of all these different enclaves of ethnicity. And although the ethnic divisions and all of their self-organization has been smoothed out over the decades to be a national Thai-ness. I think there's still this sense you can be in little networks and have your own space. And I think that's something that the city needs to understand, that it shouldn't try to make everything the same, and it shouldn't try to make Singapore be its template. It is already actually a city that a lot of urbanists are interested in. It may sound strange, the idea of Bangkok being an urban model, but there is this idea of messy urbanism, and that Bangkok has a way of coping with all these onslaughts, and it draws its strength from these different networks. When the crash happened in '97 and when the Great Flood happened in 2011, the city was able to draw on all kinds of local resources that were, and the state just couldn't cope. And maybe when the city floods and we're all having to live on stilts and so forth, it'll be the informal capabilities of this culture that are what make it survivable. Now there's, sorry Leah, but I will show another picture. There's a lot of sci-fi about Bangkok. Now this is a piece of fan art. I don't know if you've heard of fan fiction, where people write extra chapters or extra books of Harry Potter and so on. Well, there's a book about Bangkok called The Wind-Up Girl, which is set in the future. And it is precisely this informal culture that enables this flooded city, which is behind sea walls but has to deal with all this flood. How it survives. So you've got the overpasses and the sky trains with shacks on it, and you've got boats going around the roads. And the book's premise is based on these kind of slightly shady markets that go on. And so I think there's a way of thinking about Bangkok as being, its strength is its flexibility and its informality, and not being formal like Singapore. And in terms of the question from Household English over there, there is a different character of Bangkok to the rest of the country, and there's another graphic here which sort of looks at some of those. On the right here we've got an artwork that is called Country of Bangkok, and it parallels a Facebook page called and you've got a map of the country as Bangkok, which has got the Thai flag, and the rest of it, well, it's there, but Bangkok, this is Thailand here. And there's a magazine cover with a similar kind of perspective, where Bangkok is simultaneously prudish and yet showing itself at the same time, but it's doing a selfie as the flag, so it's viewing itself as being ultra-patriotic. And the whole place is being scrubbed in one of those big clean-up days. And in the Bangkok shutdown, I noticed this pair of Thai-tinted spectacles, which is one way of looking at everything through Thai perspective. And I think that it is a struggle to see Bangkok through another lens than Thai-ness. And because even in conversation with Thais, it keeps getting brought back to this, everything's a generic, and it's not. And this city has got its cultural touchstones from all of its many different peoples and subcultures and youth cultures, and now there's ever more creative subcultures. And it'll be interesting to see in decades to come how it's shaped, because the people in charge at the moment are the Cold War generation, and whether they're on the left or right of that Cold War generation, they've got an oppositional view of things. And I don't know whether anything fundamental can change until that generation is gone, unfortunately. But the next generation were brought up under democracy here. It was imperfect, but they were, their youths was surrounded by the indie culture, the alternative culture. And then you've got millennials now who are much more collegiate. They're much more looking to social betterment projects, environmental projects, all this kind of thing. So I think in 10 years we may have a very, very different management team involved in running this place. And you can see how it's already changing business. Business is changing before the state. And now business is all about corporate social responsibility, how, what projects can they do to appeal to these younger consumers. And I think in 10 years we may have a very different kind of city. Thank you.
Continue the discussion. Outside there is coffee and tea. On your way out, please give a donation to Junction, because this allow us to when we finish, allow us to do this kind of events and more. And of course, buy Philip book and get it signed by the author. Yes.
Speaking of donations, the present powers that be are funded by the top businesses completely. There was a huge Chinese dinner a little while ago, which is the topic of a magazine article with billions asked.
We are not funded by it. A small donation, very good.